financiers and bankers wanting to understand what has just happened here in this space. Something big has changed. And if they don't pay attention to what is happening here, at some point they'll be out the window, right? They're not connecting to this next generation of the internet any longer.
I'm Jane McConnell, and welcome to Reimagined World, where we talk with forward thinkers, pioneering organizations, and writers of speculative fiction. We explore emerging trends, technologies, world-changing ideas, and above all, share our journeys, challenges, and successes. Greetings. Today I'm with Joachim Stroh, and we're going to talk about DAOs. DAOs are decentralized autonomous organizations, completely different from organizations that most of us know today, and they are going to fundamentally change the way we function in this world, from people to people. Let's go. Well, hi, Joachim. It's so great to see you.
Thank you so much, Jane, for this invitation.
It's been 10 years since we've actually done something together. We were both members of Change Agents Worldwide, and it's like another world for me. And I would guess that it's quite a different world for you, too, now that you're in what I call the DAO space. Decentralized, autonomous organizations. Before we actually get into everything we're going to talk about, could you give us a sense of how you got from, say, 10 years ago to where you are today? I think that would be interesting to know.
Yes, great. So, again, thank you for inviting me to your podcast show, Imaginize here. Really like to dive into this and give your viewers and listeners, the heads up on what's happening, what has happened, since we got together 10 years ago, right?
10 years, yeah. It's been long, yeah.
Yes. For me, this has been a journey, right? A journey that's unfolding in front of me, which is really connected in some weird ways, When I left HR consulting and then we founded this boutique consultancy with Change Agents, it was always like the technology was a bit further, a bit more ripe to say, let's bring some of these social technologies into organizations, into enterprises. How can people connect within the organization, right? And then outside of the organization, right? And how can we create communities within the organization, right? So the technology was there. And for me, it was like experimentation of, okay, how can we now begin to sort of reach out to our colleagues, right? At a different level, right? At a level that is going beyond sort of just colleagues having them, and talking about projects. It's like connecting at a personal level, connecting at a level that is meaningful, not only for me, but also for the organization, to have a voice inside the organization, right? So, and that has been sort of my pathway forward from Change Agents to the Digital Life Collective, looking at some of the broader picture of, extractive technologies around us, right? The platforms that, gather all of the data around us, right? Towards, again, spaces of collaboration, right? Spaces of coming together and build the necessary level of trust, right? One of the ventures I did with friends was called Senius. Senius was like knowledge expeditions into, virtual real spaces. Can you bring people into virtual online engagements, people that you don't know, right? So, from the network, and say, let's go on a journey. Let's go on an expedition, right? And see how far we can take that. So we had a small platform there to say, let's, build a story together, right? A virtual real story with visuals, with videos, with sound effects. And you actually climb on something like Mount Everest, right? You go meet at base camp and let's go to the next sort of camps up the mountain. And how do people respond to these circumstances, right? That is all things that I explored deeply, over the last couple of years. And that led me to sort of the thing that I'm building now called Haifa DAO, right? So again, it's a container, it's a space where you can build these environments that are meant for trust, right? It's designed from trust, It's a space where you invite people to solve problems together, right? So, and that is the fascinating aspect. And the theme I see, for me, across all those years, right? Come together, realize your potential, look at the humanity here, right? Look at the relationships you're building in these spaces and see if we have a better vehicle now, a vessel really, to move us all forward to a better future.
Very interesting. You have a lot of passion for this topic. I can tell from the way you're talking. That's fantastic. Could you start with telling us what a DAO is? So I want people to understand what the concrete things that underlie your passion.
Yes, so you mentioned already the three letters, right? DAO stand for decentralized autonomous organization, right? So decentralization is sort of a new aspect of, you know, an old aspect coming together, coming back now to the forefront. If you look at the history of the internet, right? So Web 1, Tim Berners-Lee created a first iteration of the internet for us, right? It was owned by us, we could build our own little blogs, little websites, right? We controlled everything, the data. But then we moved on to, there's Web 2, there's the interactive web, right? Beginning of the 90s, I built the first sort of e-commerce website with my wife here that, by the way, still is running today, So it was really an interesting, juncture in time again, where the technology was ripe, for e-commerce. You could actually build these stores, away from the brick and mortar stuff down the street corner, right? And people ask the same questions. What is this thing that you're building there on this, what internet space? How can you do this without being physically present in a store and grabbing these books or whatever it is, right? So we did that. And it was the time for Web 2 to come online, right? To realize the potential that was there. But it also turned into something bigger, right? Obviously, the big players came in, the Amazons, the Googles, the extractive players to say, hey, this data, we give it to you for free, right? But, there's a price to pay, right? There's data we can sell now. You don't own it anymore, right? And all the stories we have now discussing how manipulated this environment really is, right? How bad it can get, right?
And what's really bad, Joachim, is that some people don't realize how bad it really is.
Yes, yes, that is true. That is so true. And yeah, it's like tapping into cognitive abilities we're not even aware of, right?
Yeah.
And then suddenly pushing us into these corners, into these fractions, right? It's a movement that now I think finding sort of a counter movement now with sort of swinging back the pendulum from the centralized web, extractive web, to again more of a decentralized web, a web where you own the data, right? Where we have the potential to say, I create my own space here, right? And nobody else can interfere with that. If you want to take it to the extreme, even governments have, problems of interfering with these spaces because they are owned by the people, right? Built for the people. They are spaces of trust, that are entirely different from the distrust, the mistrust, disinformation that is happening on the current web. So that's where I think the DAO suddenly came into the picture, right? So as you're familiar, with blockchain technology, there was the first generation of blockchain that really set the stage for, wow, there's a new way of creating a shared ledger on the internet that nobody can control, right? And it's owned by the people, right? And everything that's written to the ledger is there, it's transparent, it's immutable, right? You really can't go in there and mess up with the data anymore. It is just out there, right? That was the first generation, that created Bitcoin. And interestingly, I was just at the Bitcoin Policy Summit in Washington, D.C. last week. And this is where sort of the players coming together, the miners, right? And the producers and also, financiers and bankers wanting to understand what has just happened here in this space, right?
They sense that something has changed.
Something big has changed, right? And if they don't, pay attention to what is happening here, at some point they'll be out the window, right? They're not connecting to this next generation of the internet any longer, right? Because for me, if you think Web 2 was big, right? The Googles, the Amazons, the big players, wait until you see Web 3. There's going to be a much, much bigger space than Web 2. And that's simply because you can now invite everybody else, right? Everybody who got stranded or who didn't have the right financial means, right? Or other reasons why they couldn't participate. This Web 3 thing is a participatory space. It's inclusive enough to invite everybody else to say, you have a voice, you have an idea, well, come try it out. Join it and see what you can do with this.
So that's very different from traditional companies. Traditional companies as organizational structures don't operate like that. I mean, it's like almost, I would say, opposed to the way traditional companies operate. Wouldn't you say?
I mean, that's totally. I mean, it's something I think we've been waiting for this for a long, long time. If you go back to Frederick Taylor, right? We discussed, at Change Agent Worldwide, right? This was 100 years ago, right? Where you had the first structures of a formal organization, right? The traditional organizations. It's top down, it's command and control, right? And it has a specific purpose, right? So optimizing it, running it for profit and squeezing out the things that you want to get out of the market, right? that was the idea of Taylor's, idea of these kind of scientific management principles applied to organizations. They're still intact today, right? This is still how organizations operate. And now, finally, 100 years later, we have this new thing called the DAO, right? A new kind of organization, really, right? That is now taking a step forward into what if we take a different look at markets, right? Instead of these competitive things, instead of the things that's you against me, either I win or you win, right? It's something that we have to tackle together. Why? Because the complexity of the market around us and the urgencies, that we see now creeping up everywhere around us demand different ways of working together, right? Demand different ways of organizing, of coordinating our efforts, right? And this is, I think, where suddenly the DAO came to the forefront to say, well, you actually can do this in the DAO, right? You actually can create an entity, a space that not only attracts your sort of core team here at the beginning, but then quickly add on a whole community layer. And we can get into that, later on.
That would be very good to get into how it works together, because it sounds, I would say, like magic, only because it is so different from what we're used to today. Maybe now would be a good time to get into a little bit of the mechanics of it.
Sure. So, DAOs went through their own iterations, right? There was sort of the first version. You heard about the Constitution DAO, or the very first DAO before that, that got hacked, and then people got into the treasury of the DAO, and then they rethink, everything what the DAO actually could do. But it's been a long journey already. HIFA, the organization itself, we've been doing this for 5 years now.
5 years.
Yeah. And we actually sort of used the DAO to build the DAO platform. At the beginning, we had another project called Seeds. Seeds is a regenerative currency. So we always, we're in the regeneration space, in a space where socio-ecological aspects are really important, socio-economic ones, socio-political ones, right? So we tapped into sort of a resonance field suddenly where people feel like drawn towards something new, right? This DAO thing and the regenerative aspect of that, that we have to save the planet, right? We have to come to a better future for, generations ahead of us, right? And this tied together so much into, oh, wow, then actually we can use this as a single container, but then expand that to, well, what happens if you have thousands of DAOs out there? What do you have millions of DAOs out there? How do these DAOs starting to connect, right? How do they exchange value? How do they exchange knowledge, right? How is that space different from this highly competitive space where you have silos, right?
Yes.
Where you have proprietary thinking, whereas my IP versus your IP, let's go to court, who wins here, right? Here, we find it much more open. People are willing to participate, share their knowledge, really. This whole concept of knowledge sharing that we brought into organizations way back then, right, is now sort of the soil. It's the ground, Just like HIFA, the name HIFA stands for the mycelium and the soil, right? We want to be the connector, right? To make sure there's enough, attention paid to, yes, you can grow, your own organizations in a very organic way, right? Using our platform and using other platforms out there that help create these kind of organizations, right?
Can you give us some examples of how people work together and how they coordinate and how they achieve their goals in a DAO?
Yes. Let me take a little detour here also to talk about the DAO itself. What do you do inside a DAO? Right?
Yes, good.
Because the term itself becomes, I think, more mainstream, but we're not there yet, right? We're still early days. There's still, if you look at the adoption lifecycle curve, right? There's this big chasm, right? Where it says, what is that thing, and how do you explain that to people, and how do you relate to that? So let me talk a little bit about the DAO functionality, sort of the feature sets we built into the DAO. Because what we've done is we've taken the DAO sort of as a first generation construct. There were these initial DAOs I mentioned, Constitution DAO, DAO House. There are a lot of ways of creating a DAO, and especially became strong inside the blockchain communities, right? Because as you know, there's now the second generation Ethereum blockchain, much more sort of business and supply chain oriented, right? I think the big player will attach to that kind of second generation blockchain. But then there's also the third generation blockchain already. And for the third generation, you see a lot of improvements over the first one, right? If the energy consumption is so high at the early, days, watch what you see in the later, end of the spectrum. With, for example, we were using Telos, as our blockchain. That's a third generation blockchain based on EOS technology. And it uses like the energy equivalent of the entire network, consumes like a washer and dryer. That's
Oh,
it, no more
that's
than that.
not
It's,
much.
it's not a question anymore. Don't talk about energy consumption. It's already solved, right? And so second generation blockchain, Ethereum will also get to that. They just went through a large revamp of their own platform and underlying sort of proof of stake, proof of work protocols that were there in the early days, right? They become much more efficient now, and you don't have to have these high energy costs and also transaction cost, right? Ethereum is still very expensive in terms of these gas fees, as it's called, right? So there are these hidden fees suddenly coming up. In the third generation, we don't have these fees anymore. We say it's actually free. We don't pay anything for any transaction. That's a huge incentive for coming into this space and then really exchange the value with other players, right? So if I can send you tokens and we agree on this token represents some value or the thing that we're creating or the product and service that you're building here, switching to that token space it's a whole different dimension of how effective and efficient these things can become.
Can you talk a little bit about tokens? Because I think that's not a commonly understood idea.
Yes. There are a lot of conversations right now. What can you? It's called tokenize. What assets do you have that can be sort of tokenized? I'll give you a few examples. Early on, we were engaged in what's called energy communities in Europe. There's legislation now in Europe that says, we sense, there's a crisis, energy crisis in Europe. We need to do something about it. What about we look into decentralization, as a way to solve these energy crises there? And then suddenly they came up with, yes, we have now solar energy, it becomes more and more effective every year, it's cheaper every year. What if we decentralize this technology and tokenize this technology, right? So that means there's some solar panels in some village somewhere, right? And you can actually convert this into tokens and say, you need energy. Well, you only need the energy token, that is created through a DAO again, right? And as soon as you own this token, and it's actually called a utility token. There are different kinds of tokens. We can get into that. But what Hi-Fi has and what our token is a utility token. So there's some access, some purpose of the token. It's not meant to go on the market and speculate on the token, right? That was sort of the first wave of the cryptocurrency space, right? That exploded, and all the big players, collapsed. Now we are, I think, in a second phase where we recognize, oh, there's actually something much more useful and meaningful you can do with this technology. So we're looking at things like the energy communities in Europe, where you can create these hyper-local communities. They produce energy, they're consumers, producers, right? And then you create like a local market, and the economy looks entirely different if you base it on these tokens, because you can say that token is only used in that particular community, right? So you buy and sell these tokens there, and then you can go further and say, okay, well, it's actually an energy token. Maybe we can tie this into other economic, effects inside this small, market and community. Why not, buying things, inside the farmer's market, right? Why not tying it to the waste recycle process, right? And earn tokens that way, right? So there could be many, many variations of these tokens being applied to this local community. And that for me creates a whole different way of regeneration, a different way of circular economies that you can build with these token-based systems, right? And that's the beauty of the DAO, right? So stepping a little bit out of the current financial system, right, highly regulated, towards something that's utility driven. It's based on sort of much more local circular economies that you can build and attract people towards.
Is that based on people using their phones or a digital means of exchanging tokens?
Yeah, that's a good question. How do you actually tap into this? Where do you begin with all this stuff?
Yeah, where do you begin with all this?
Web 2, everybody knows, you need your username and password. You set up an account. You don't own that account. It's the company that owns it, right? Web 3 is entirely different, right? This is where you have your own, what's called a wallet here. See, this is, we have created our own Hi-Fi wallet, where you actually have a way to now participate and make decisions through your own personal device, right? much more secure because your private key is stored on this phone. It doesn't exist anywhere else. So it's kind of the end of the username and password era. Now you have a new era where only this thing called private key matters, right? And it gives you the right to participate, right? It gives you the right to transact, right? So if you have the same wallet and you can download it, for free, and install it and create your account for free, right? So if you have that account, now I can actually transact with you. I can say, I have a couple of tokens. Let me send that over to you. And then you can send it to another person, right? And you immediately set some, circular thing in motion. And this is
Right.
also how you interact with the DAO, right? So every DAO, coming back to the DAO itself, what we do there is setting up proposals. So meaning DAOs are, sometimes I call them agreement machines, right? So we want to come to agreements because now the fertility is there to create a space of trust. Now, what do we do with this trust? Well, we make decisions, right? So we make proposals and see if everybody's aligned with that proposal. And once you've done this proposal, you post it on the DAO, right? Everybody sees it. It's a transparent space. It's highly visible. And then I can say, I support that proposal. Yes, I use my wallet again here, right? Go in there and support it, right? And others do that too. So you can see how democratic that gets, right? To say new proposals are floating up to the surface. We're deciding on these together, right? And then move forward from there.
Can anybody join any DAO? Surely there must be some kind of filtering or judgment of the people coming in.
This is where I get into the dynamics of how do you build these DAOs, right? How do they originally start? Very much like our consultancy in the past. There's like a founding team, right? A couple of people coming together with the initial ideas, right? So they make up what we call the core team space, right? So the core team comes together, sets up maybe the first proposals to say, this is how we define how we work together, right? This is the purpose of our organization, right? For me, the DAO is like the ideal place to create more purpose-oriented organization, right?
Yes.
They're not for profit; they're for purpose, really, right?
Yeah.
And you find that you write it down, you agree on this, and say these were the 5 or 10 people here at the very beginning agreeing on that's the purpose of the DAO. This is what we want to build together, right? Publish it. It's out there. It's on the blockchain, written to the blockchain. It's immutable. Nobody can tamper with this anymore. It's going to be there for the next 100 years. If the blockchain survives, if we survive, right, it's going to be there, right? And everybody can see it. That's the beauty of the Web3 space. You make these proposals visible, right? And then others see these proposals. They can see, oh, here's the team, right? Here's what they just proposed. Here's where they agreed on. I feel like, can I join you guys, right? And this is when you can just go into conversations with these DAOs, right? It's like your mission, your vision is fully aligned with what I want to do. Do you need more people on your team, right? You attract them, they come in, they create a role, for example, inside the organization, or just a simple contribution, right? We have things like quests where you can apply for a small thing that you do to help the organization to go to the next layer, right? And then you fulfill the quest and you get tokens for that, right? And then automatically you feel like you're part of this thing called DAO, right? Part of that team here. And this is how the DAO grows, right? This is then where you can attract more people, maybe, and then we can get to what does it mean for a community space that's suddenly surrounding a DAO, right? They may have a role in this, right? They might contribute in different ways, right? They have ideas about new proposals that may be, considered for refining or optimizing or doing whatever they want to do with the DAO.
So decision making is a collaborative act. Does it have to be unanimous?
Great question. This is again where it's mind-boggling to see the level of innovation happening in this Web3 space, right? So you take a thing like governance, right, or decision making, right, and you break it down into how can we actually make decisions together, right? Not where the boss is on top. Just I mentioned Hi-Fi is an organization we used, to actually create this thing. So for 5 years we did not have a boss. There's no CEO. Nobody can tell anybody else what to do, right? It's a democratic organization. We made over 1,000 proposals and agreements, over the last years. And I can tell you it works, right? I still have the same level of sense of trust inside the organization, right? I don't feel like any kind of burnout or stress, because of pressures that you see in traditional organizations, right? It just works this way. And it's also not a new thing, because there've been, other types of organization. Frederic Laloux talks about the type of, flatter organizations, right? Teal organizations, right? There's sociocracy, holocracy, different kinds of models that have been
There are
out there.
lots of models out there. Yes.
Lots of models out there. That's right. Hierarchy, John Haspen, and knowledge-oriented organizations. There are many, many models out there. Suddenly, with the DAO, you can say, hey, here's a container where you can actually realize this type of organization. You can set it up. You can configure this organization based on what you think is the best way to work together, right? So, give you an example for Haifa. So, what we're using is a simple, for a core team, a binary decision method. That's a yes, no, abstain thing, right? And you can then say, okay, what it means to say yes, for the organization, you decide that, And there's a thing called unity and quorum, where you can say, we need an alignment of 60%, 70% of members need to say yes, the rest, can say no. It's okay. Or we need at least 20% of people present, for making this decision, right? So the unity and quorum is then a parameter that says, let's tune that in a way that says, how far do you want to go with this, right? Is it full consensus? Does it mean, yes, 100% people need to be here to decide and they all need to say yes? Fine, so be it. You can try that. If it's majority voting, you say, okay, it's 51%, of people saying yes, and 51% at least need to show up here, right? So suddenly you have majority vote, right? But then you get into all kinds of combinations that are really interesting to explore, inside this binary decision space. At Haifa, we're using something called 80-20, almost like a Pareto principle. It's like magic setting, as you said at the beginning. There's something magic about DAOs, where you say 80% need to agree to that, and 20% need to show up. And that has worked for over 1,000 proposals for us, right? Where we get to a point, yes, sometimes there's disagreement, right? And it does not pass, right? But then you always come back to, oh, we didn't actually do enough sense making, right? So there's always this distinction of sense making before decision making, right? So do some good sense making, have people understand what the issues really are before you just hit the button and say yes or no on something, right? That has helped us a lot, right? This principle, core principle. It's also deeply embedded in sociocracy, where you have these debates and really conversations and alignment that lead to this consent-based decision, that is prevalent there. So again, it's a space that is really interesting, opening up right in front of our eyes. And we haven't even tapped into the next layer, right? When you get into the community space, how do you make decisions, between 10, 15 people? Binary is okay, but if you have 100, 1,000, 10,000 people, right?
Yeah. What is the answer to that? How do you make that work?
Yes, so that's something we're now building on top of sort of the next level layer, we call it on Haifa, to bring the community into that. But we've been working with these decision methods for a long time. Give you a few examples. There's decision methods that are delegated, right? Where you can say there are certain representatives, key people that you trust inside the organization, and they have the decision power, right? So every couple of months, you can say there's an election happening, and you elect, a couple of people that decide for the rest of the community space, right? Because if you ask everyone in the community space, that's a difficult thing to do if it's growing too big, right?
Right.
But it can also, there are other models where we have cooperatives, right? Cooperatives have member meetings, and every member has one voice, right? So one member, one voice. And you can do this with the DAO too. Suddenly say, this is our decision space and method. To say, you, Jane, join the DAO. You have one account, you're one member, and the next vote, you can participate with one vote, right? And then you go on. But then other things come up and say, what if we have investors coming in, right? Obviously, they want to have a bit more voice, right? So they have an interest, dedicated interest in making sure.
You said investors, people who will put money into the DAO?
That's right. Yeah, let's get into that too. It's not even possible.
We've got a lot to get into, but yeah, let's do it. Investors. I wouldn't have imagined that you dealt with investors.
Every DAO has a treasury, right? So a treasury is the place where you collect the tokens, right? And they're highly secured. Again, you're in Web3 space. Security is much higher there. And as soon as there are any transactions going in and out of the treasury, you have something called a multi-signature process. Right, so that means multiple people of the core team have to be present to sign off on something that goes in and out of the treasury, right? So with the treasury, you can say every DAO now has what we call a native token, a token that represents your DAO. So let's say Imaginize is a DAO. You, Jane, come up and say, I want to create a DAO for my network, right? You create the DAO and you say, my token is actually called Imaginize, right? So you create that inside the DAO. And then you can say, hey, investors, we're doing cool podcasts, watch what we've done in the past. They're great. If you want to help me out, if you want to be part of this, buy some of my tokens, right? So they simply go to your website and say, okay, give me 100 of your Imaginize tokens, right? They, of course, use fiat currency to purchase these tokens, right?
So they give me money for that.
They give you money. That's your working
Fiat
capital.
money, yes.
Fiat money, working capital that you can then use, to, prepare other podcasts, increase your team size, whatever you want, buy technology. And that's a signal now for others to say, look, someone actually purchased your Imaginize token, right? So the Imaginize token is now a representation of the value you're creating for your own network, right? And that's the fascinating aspect. Other people will see that. They may want to contribute to that, and they may even become a member of your Imaginize DAO, right? So they say, yes, I'm a producer, doing some great stuff here. Let me reward him and it can be a mix of both these native tokens, Imaginize tokens, because, eventually they will increase in value. People recognize the good work you're doing, right? And you can even go to secondary markets at some point and say, let's offer this Imaginize token on an exchange, right? And then say other people, investors again, can buy this token, right? So there's a perfect interface for you to say, bring in people who feel like attracted to your vision, right? You're actually building something. And this Imaginize token is not an imaginary thing, right? It's real, meaning you're doing these real podcasts, right? You're doing the real hard work on the ground, right? Just like we're doing at Haifa with, building the platform. There's value, there's utility in that token, right? It's not a security, right? It's not a speculative investment here. It's utility, right? And think about, everybody can now do this with their own DAO, right? You have your own ideas of how do you build these products and services. Just create it, just do it.
So that's fascinating. In fact, that gives me a good idea. I'll have to think about that. People can create DAOs even if they're within their members, they're salaried members of a large organization. They can create a DAO to achieve something with a particular goal, a particular purpose inside an organization, couldn't they?
They could. If, you're not going against sort of the framework of the organization itself.
Right.
Because as you
From
know,
a legal viewpoint, legally speaking.
Right. HR and legal will have a say in that, right? To say how far can you actually create this inside organizations? But actually, in fact, there's actually now a new thing happening. If you're familiar with Renan Heyi, something that has developed in China with Haier, Haier, a large appliances manufacturer in China.
Oh, of course, yes.
You've been there, right? Yeah, so you know this story, right? So they create these what's called micro enterprises inside the organization. And interestingly, they look very much like little DAOs, right, inside an organization, because they get the autonomy, right? They get the, do your own thing, and the connectivity too, right? Towards directly connected to customers, and they give the feedback and then they work on that. They became their own centers, right? And their own DAOs, really. And for me, this is an interface now into a large organization, right? That's actually, we're working with a consultancy in Munich, in Germany, that is now looking at these models and say, okay, Renan Heyi is now done, has been around for quite a while. Can we use DAOs for that? So they're actually, exploring now things where other organizations like Bayer has looked at that and says, yes, we want to do these micro enterprises too, right? What is a good vehicle to do that, right? And for me, that's exactly the right time to say, hey, let's introduce DAOs here.
I worked with Bayer about 10 years ago or so for their digital workplace projects. And they were certainly far from the kind of thinking you're talking about now. So there's obviously been changes in their mindset, in the way they see what they want to be and what they want to become.
Yes, a lot of change happening in that space. And I think we need that. We're ready to say, there's so much sort of, change happening. And look at the next generation, and, the workforce is coming in. the millennials, Gen Z. They're so frustrated by this. They don't want to work in an organization that's highly, top down, and I sit in my box in my cubicle somewhere, right? And have no way of participating really in the decision process, right? Now we're giving them a door to open that. Yeah.
Something I was wondering about as you were talking, the decision-making process takes a little bit of time. And in a hierarchical organization, someone at the top makes a decision and bang, it's maybe implemented, maybe not implemented, but the decision is made quickly. If there's a need for speed in some competitive context or a political context or some sort of environmental impact and things have to move fast, can a DAO function with speed?
So for me, this is an African proverb that says, if you want to go fast, go alone, right? If you want to go far, go together, right? So for me, yes, there's a certain aspect where it makes sense, to go fast, right? Crisis situations, we have very structured approaches to how do you step in and say, help these people on the ground,
Yeah.
disaster strike. What do? We already know what the solution is going to look like. We already know how to deploy resources, right? And you want to have a highly effective command and control chain, that's deployed in hours and solves the problem, right? DAOs, on the other hand, is when you get into this other territory on, well, there are these other kinds of problems that are much more wicked. They're hard to resolve, in isolation, as a central institution or organization, are things that has the solution for that. Most likely not. This is where you need to connect and coordinate activities around a wider network, right? And this is again where the strength of the DAO comes in to say, yes, for that kind of territory, you should consider it this way.
I think education might be an example of that.
Perfect example. That's right. Education is a big piece. Working with a couple of groups to say, what happens if you do schools, DAOs for schools, right? So what if you suddenly open up this participatory space for all of the stakeholders in the school environment, right? So administrative people, yes, they're there, they have to run the school, but they are the parents, they are the teachers, they are the students, right? Why not giving them some kind of voice to say, look, education is changing. Let's adjust our curriculum, do something about it, right? And then you can come into a DAO space to say, let's propose something new, right? Let's go through the sense-making process and the decision-making process. Once we come to an agreement, we can get this thing off the table and move on to the next, question that's opening up there.
That's very interesting. I've been doing some work on how educational institutions today are not at all adapted to the world that we live in. And I've interviewed a number of people, and I've put together a little piece that I'll talk about later, but it hasn't been published yet, so I'm not going to talk about it. But the idea is that education needs to change, and it needs to change dramatically. And what you're describing would be a perfect solution in many cases. The number of people who do homeschooling now because they want to have a say in what their children are learning. And if you could get a group of people working together on homeschooling in a community, that could be a DAO, couldn't it?
Yes, absolutely. This is where you open up this new participatory space of saying, we're ready to do this, right? And the barriers to entry are fairly low, right? All you need to do is invite people, right? All you need to do is we're already doing this, we have, school board meetings, we have parent-teacher meetings, right? So it's nothing new here, right? It's just saying now, actually, we not only meet, we can make a decision, right? A decision that's written on the blockchain, is public, it's there, it's transparent. And then we can take it further from there.
I'm just thinking about people out in the world who might want to be working in a DAO, doing something like with education or with health or whatever the topic. Is there any kind of sort of DAO marketplace, an open sort of marketplace where people can express what they can bring to a DAO, and DAOs can look and see, or people running DAO, not running DAOs, people in DAOs can look and find more people if they need more people. Is there anything like that exists?
So we launched our beta in October last year, right? So after the 4.5 years there, we said we're ready for beta, right? We had a lot of alphas, meaning friends and family, trying this thing out. Now we have the beta up and running, and anybody who's interested can go to the hi-fi.earth website and then try it out for themselves, right? We even changed our pricing model. Initially, we thought, oh, we need to do some kind of a Web2, subscription model, right? That everybody does, the SaaS, classic SaaS model, right? We said no to that because Web3 is different. The value is actually created over time. The value is not there at the beginning. You don't have to pay for that piece, when you have your first founders coming together and setting up the first proposal. We said, we believe in you, in your vision, in your service, in the product you're creating. Let's hold on to that and create a model that is based on the participants. So you set up your DAO, and there's a mechanism that says you believe in a DAO, you stake tokens into a DAO. There's this thing for Web3 called staking. So again, it's like you have your imaginized tokens, right, in your DAO. People can buy this, and then they can actually stake this token. They can say, I want to support your DAO. Let me stake some tokens. So they kind of freeze this as an asset, and say, now you can use it for a longer term, right? Now you can invite other members, for your DAO to participate in a way, right?
How can those people check out my Imaginize DAO and make sure it's legitimate?
Yes, so that comes back to the marketplace you mentioned. So since we launched in October, we have about 300 organizations in the marketplace. We have our own view. Again, it's accessible. I'll send you the link. After this.
Yeah, we'll put them on the web page for the podcast.
Yes, please. That'd be great. So you can actually look into each and every DAO and see what is happening. Who are they inviting? What proposals are they launching, right? And then you learn from each other. So for me, again, that comes back to this idea of this is a commons, a knowledge commons, right? Everybody is learning from each other. If somebody finds out something new and it worked for them, they share that with the rest of the community, with the rest of the ecosystem, right? And they want to with the entire network, right? So we're learning from each other, we're benefiting from each other, right? And this is how we're going to solve the real difficult problems together.
Yeah, it's really inspirational. I think I told you I put out a note on LinkedIn and one on Substack asking people, telling them I was going to be talking to you about DAOs and did they have questions? And we've covered a number of the questions already. But one in particular that I find interesting is they wanted to know what kind of roles do you need in a DAO? Because these are all people coming from a company environment. And so when you're in a company, you have a job title, you have a role in most companies. And in DAOs, I gather you don't have a role as such.
So I think first generation of DAOs didn't have that capacity. They were meant, to make fast decisions for projects, because there's money coming in, for blockchain communities, a lot of investors, and they want to see this needs to be driven forward, right? There need to be some more projects, some more, technology pieces that would make this blockchain better, right? We said, because my background is in HR consulting, so building organizations and with change agents is designing organizations from the ground up. What does it mean to create a new type of organization, right? I said, we need to bring these elements into a DAO, right? And that's what we did over the last 5 years. So you see reward systems, a compensation-based system right into, brought into the DAO. You will see a proposal system that I mentioned, right? But you also see a role-based system. So you can actually create roles that are based on what we call role archetypes. So
Archetypes.
certain archetypes you see are sort of prevalent in organizations, and you can define a template for them. So Jane, you come in, as say an architect, right, or a catalyst, right? Catalyst will be a good role for you. So I'm creating a role archetype for the Imaginized DAO to say, there's a catalyst role. You are the catalyst, and the only thing you do is you apply for that role, right? And based on your, say, expertise, we can also break it down into different levels of roles, right? So it could be beginner, entry level, it could be a highly advanced expert level. You decide that for your DAO. Could be a single salary band, right? A single band that says only everybody earns equal amounts of tokens, right? That's it, end of story. Or you can go highly granular, or you can go Microsoft, right? 100 bands, right? With lots and lots and lots. And the second thing is circles, right? So how do you structure an organization, right? And again, you can go back to, a hierarchical thing where it's like layer after layer after layer after layer, right? It's these nested circles. Core principle of sociocracy, as you know, they have these holons and holons, right? And you can mimic a hierarchical organization in that thing too. But what we found is this type of organization is much more organic, right? It's driven by humans being there. So that means it can adjust, it can change over time, right? So our organizational structure has changed many times, right? So new circles came up, sub-circles were created, they moved around, right? And the organization sort of evolved really in a very organic way over the years, right? And now we're yet in another iteration to say, what are the three fundamental aspects of any organization? That has to do with the knowledge it retains. It has to do with the relationship it builds with its customer, with the people, and it has to do with the technology or product or service that they're creating, right? And this is really it. And then you see them almost as like a Venn diagram, overlapping Venn diagram, where technology or the product plays very much into the relationship building, right? You need to explain that, plays very much into the blueprints and the knowledge you're creating in the organization, right? So there are new kinds of organizational structure that are coming out of this kind of research and experimentation really in that space.
I think we're going to have to schedule a second talk a little bit later because there's a lot of things we haven't covered. But I'd like to ask you, based on what you've seen so far in 5 years, you said you've been in this space, what would you advise people if someone wants to start a DAO? What advice would you give to them?
First point is, recognizing to see this as a sort of expanding space, as an open space, as an invitation, for others to contribute, right? You're a contributor to something that's anchored in a purpose and a mission, right? So see if you can align with that kind of vision, right? See if you can align with the people. Sense the trust that is already present in the space, right? That's the first thing. If we have new people coming to join Haifa, the Haifa DAO, is they sense it immediately that something is different from a traditional organization, right? The way we talk, the way we meet, the way we make these agreements is different, right? And that's a hard thing for a lot of people to let go of the baggage they brought in from the traditional thing, right? Where are my employees? Who do I report to? Well, no, nobody, right? There is no boss here, right? It's very much, there's a self-organizing thing to that, right? Where, yes, you have to reorient yourself, but there are others around you that help you, right? That go through the onboarding process with you. And every DAO can design that in their own ways, They can, go as far as, creating a protocol for onboarding, right? And go step by step, right? Or they just throw them into the water and say, this is how we work, this is what we do. Maybe you want to talk to this circle over here that may be even more functional in nature, right? It's a marketing circle. And they do marketing stuff. Great, talk to them, see if you want to join them, and then come to agreement what kind of role do you want to have in that marketing circle, right? And then so be it. So it's a very sort of organic, yes, but also decentralized environment where you push these things to the edges of the organization. You don't want to concentrate this on the top, right? Yeah. Or into an additional managerial layer, right? You just push it to the edges, and see what happens. But then if critical things happen, if critical decisions need to be made in the organization, you come back together, right? You say, here's a proposal that affects everyone in the organization.
So something that's very important is the mindset of the person who wants to start the DAO, and the mindset that will then spread, or the mindset that will attract other people with a similar desire to work in that way.
That's right. I think that's a critical piece here. So stepping away from this competitive mindset you have, in traditional organization, you need to fight your way up the ladder, right? If you don't do it, you're out. Towards a mindset that says, I'm collaborating. I'm with other people here. In fact, we call it the DAO, the DHO. So it's a decentralized human organization.
I like that. DHO.
DHO, right? So the do, come in and do stuff, and it's human, it's people who are making decisions. Even though, another big topic is AI is coming, right? So generative AI is now finding its way into organizations, right? What do we do with that suddenly, right? But in the end, there's still humans, right? There's still humans who make the decisions, right? We have to decide which path are we taking, right? We're not handing this over to the AI, but there's the strong sort of aspect of, I need to trust you, Jane. I need to make sure that the decisions we're making together are fully aligned, right? It resonates with the purpose we're having here for our, Reimagined DAO, and let's do that, right?
Well, you've got me inspired, Joachim, to create an Reimagined DAO. Seriously, I'd never thought of that. Do you have any last point that you'd like to make before we close?
Sure. So for me, it's try to see what is happening on the internet right now. See what this Web3 is about, right? And you don't have to fully understand what everything is, right? But see there are new opportunities, new doors really opening. And see if you feel attracted to some of those, right? Feel if you have maybe some people around you and maybe a community you've created a while ago, but it wasn't really ready to take action, right? Wasn't really ready to create something out of this gathering, right? You may have had great conversations, right? Really interesting people coming together. But if you want to take it to the next level, right? To say, we're actually building something together here. We want to have, an impact on what we're doing here. We want to hand over things to sort of the next generation. What happens if we go into retirement, right? We're not getting any younger here, right? So what happens to the next generation? We need to bring them on board, right? So they can take over at some point and then set their own things into motion, right? So think more long term. Think what you can do today, and then try it out. For me, it's like yes, jump into the water, see how far you can take. It's still early days, right? So experiment a lot. Expect that things will go wrong, right? Because these are new concepts that you have to deal with, right? But it's fun. It's a fun space. It's a space that's changing every single day. There's something new innovative things, coming up, new breakthroughs coming up, every single day. You see that in the DAO landscape, right? So yeah, jump in.
Okay, well, I think we'll probably wait a little bit of time and then jump back in with you again. I think there'll probably be reactions and comments to what we've actually talked about. But Joachim, I'd like to thank you so much for your time and your ability to communicate with such passion, the vision that you have, and a vision in a sense of vision is a word that's used badly sometimes. So it's something you see, it's sort of words on a piece of paper, but you have a real vision, a living vision based on the ground, what's happening on the ground. And I think you've shared that really, really well. And I want to thank you for that.
Thank you so much, Jane. That was a great conversation. To be continued, as they say, right?
Yes, we will continue. Absolutely.
Thank you so much. Take care.